Hello students, welcome to chapter 13, Exporting, Importing, and Countertrade. This chapter has an interesting opening case with two examples of companies that are engaging in exporting for different reasons. However, they did cite similar problems. Because you're exporting and importing, there's some recruitment of foreign staff issues, costs of business travels, communication problems, and a major problem, especially with international businesses, just getting paid. So we're going to look at some of the reasons why firms decide to export instead of doing the other things as we've discussed in Chapter 12. So as it says there, Chapter 12 was mostly about exporting as just one of the range of strategic options for profiting from international expansion. Chapter 13 is more concerned with the whole mechanics of exporting and importing. So we look at some of the details of how to export and understanding that it's for large companies as well as small companies. So more specific details about exporting and importing, and then some of the ways that are available to protect your transaction. So the overview there, it's basically saying that because there's been a decline in trade barriers, various regional economic agreements we've talked about in previous chapters, there has been a significant increase in export opportunities, as well as the volume of export activity in the world has become much easier and has grown significantly. Based on modern communication, transportation technologies have alleviated some of the concerns and problems associated with exporting. Majority of the first few slides, just some really good information to read along, so I'm just going to do that. However, understanding that the situation is not easy to export, there are some significant challenges. Smaller businesses do find the whole process intimidating, and a host of unanticipated problems. So as we discussed with our first assignment as well as the case problem, is that you first must identify potential markets. That seems to be the biggest problem. As soon as you identify those potential markets, then you can decide on how to enter and on what scale to enter. You have to avoid those unanticipated problems associated with doing business in that foreign market. Become familiar with the whole export-import process, and the financing and export credit insurance is a significant issue as well. So this chapter, after we talk about the whole exporting process, we will review the process of countertrade, briefly introduced in an earlier chapter. So countertrade, basically dealing with countries with either low currency value or currency that is not convertible. So if you still want to engage with that country in terms of international trade, you have to find other ways to receive payment that's not based on currency. So large revenue and profit opportunities can be found. Let's look at some of the there's some government services and aids that are available to help manage the export and importing process. So definitely look at those avenues if you are interested in importing or exporting. We're not going to go over those specifically here, but just there are various agencies available. Some common pitfalls: poor market analysis, basically not doing your homework. We talked about examples with Target once again, and even with Canadian Tire, just not doing that proper market analysis. Poor understanding of competitive conditions in the foreign market. Something that you will be looking at for your case report is what are the competitive or demand conditions in those countries you have chosen. Has there been a failure to customize the product to the needs of foreign customers, or are you going to produce a similar product and hope that it is desired by the foreign market? Effective distribution program, poorly executed promotion in the foreign market, and problem securing financing. And that's where some government agencies and other agencies step in to help secure that financing. There are loans available, and there are opportunities to secure against risk of not being paid. Some difficulties, as it says there, novice new-time exporters tend to underestimate the time and expertise it takes to cultivate that business relation in that foreign country. It's a lot different than seeking new business opportunities in the same market. This one, because of economic, legal, political differences, cultural differences, there just is more time needed to cultivate that business relation in a foreign country. Significant amount of management resources are needed, and many foreign customers, especially in developing or undeveloped countries, require that face-to-face negotiation because they would be not as familiar with probably some of the technology, or just the lack of trust as well. So you may spend months learning about a country's trade regulations, business practices, and more before a deal can be closed, because you as the exporter, you want to ensure that things that you sign up for, how are they going to be evaluated, how are they going to be protected, what kind of legal standing do you have in a foreign country. And lots of paperwork, as it says there. So information difficulties as well as some, in addition to some other promises or pitfalls, just not understanding the market, or lack of awareness, knowledge of opportunities that are available, especially for a small business. You have perhaps done some exporting and you just don't know what other markets or demands are there in other foreign markets for your product, and there are some agencies that will help you get sorted in the right direction. Including some trading companies, EMCs, export management companies. They are there to help you for a fee establish that exporting operation. They will either start it up, manage it until you have been sufficiently trained and are able to continue that on. So we're going to go into the one of the major sections of this chapter is the whole export-import financing process. Here's two examples: French importer, Canadian exporter, importing and exporting the product and payment. It's complicated. International business transactions are complicated because of possible differences in economic, political, legal, cultural, including language factors and elements. Doing business in the same market, you have a similar economic, political, legal, cultural factors is easier, but still somewhat difficult. Cash payments are preferred until trust can be established. If someone doesn't pay you and they're in the same market, same area, you basically just drive down and talk to them and just get that understanding back to where it should be. But if you're dealing with an international business, it's just not as easy to travel there to talk to them about payment, to talk to, or even to call them up and such. So this issue of trust is a significant, important element in international business transactions. What happens first? In this example we have here, does the exporter send the product first, or does the importer send the money first? What happens if the product that's received is not the right product, or it's damaged during shipping? What happens if the agreed upon funds that were supposed to be transferred are now different because the exchange rate has changed? To facilitate this whole export-import process, there's various financial devices that we will discuss, including letter of credit, draft bill, and a bill of lading. So you're probably familiar with these terms. Basically, these terms are just used to help manage this whole import-export process. So the letter of credit, this becomes a financial contract. It's issued by the bank at the request of an importer. Basically, the importer needs to show the exporter that there are sufficient funds available set aside for payment, so that it gives trust to the exporter to actually carry out with this transaction. And there's some diagrams that basically show some of this. We'll probably just leave that to the end. A draft is something that happens during the whole import-export process. It's bill of exchange. It's initiated after sending the products. Once the exporting of goods has started, the exporter can send that to the bank or the third party used by the importer to basically say that the products have been received. Here's a draft saying I can now be, the financial part of this transaction can now be initiated, basically to start that payment process. The bill of lading basically fulfills three purposes: the receipt, contract, and a document of title. The receipt indicates that the carrier has received the merchandise, it's in transit. A contract, in terms that details the responsibilities of the courier, and document of title, in order to facilitate payment for the exporter, basically who has responsibility for these goods in shipment. So there's many different types of bills of lading, with some specifying ownership. Either to the exporter still has ownership of it while in transit, the importer has ownership once it started transit, or perhaps the carrier has ownership during transit. It provides insurance that both parties could have, and of course there's various other responsibilities. What starts off as, back here, a simple process of importing and exporting becomes quite more complicated. Basically a 13-14 step process showcasing the letter of credit, the draft, the bill of lading in terms of the third party in here, the carrier, who's responsible for the product during shipping. So basically this whole diagram is just to show the three different instruments that are used, and to show how and what instruments can be used to kind of create that trust element between the importer and exporter. Because as we've said, does the importer send the cash before he or she or they receive the product, and does the exporter send the product without any type of documentation that he or she or they will get paid? So this is the whole export-import transaction process. And we'll come back into the second part of this video to talk about countertrade.